Hey everyone, it's Carissa Wiley here for EllenHutson.com. Thanks for joining me today. In this month's edition of the Ellen Hutson newsletter, I am exploring 10 ways to use the brand new Hero Arts Hero Hues Reactive Inks. Now, these inks not only come in a beautiful rainbow of colors, and here are 14 of the 15, ooh, but they are a brand new formulation of ink from Hero Arts. They are a hybrid ink, which means they combine both properties of dye inks and pigment inks. And they come in the standard ink pad size here. And you can see it's a nice firm felt pad that the ink is carried on, and it's raised up a little bit from the case. Now I'm going to actually touch the ink pad here, which I am not a huge fan of getting ink on my fingers, but you're going to see that there is a little bit of opacity to these inks, and that is part of the pigment property of these inks. They also dry quickly to the touch, yet they stay wet long enough to allow you to do some various techniques, and they are reactive with water. I'm going to start out by stamping all of these colors so you can see this beautiful palette, and I have my Brutus Monroe stamp cleaner here along with my Hero Arts Ultra Clean, and I'm going to make sure that this heart stamp that I'm using, this is from the Essentials by Ellen High 5 stamp set. I use this heart a lot for swatching. I'm going to make sure it's nice and clean, so I'm just rubbing it on that scrubber pad, wiping it with a baby wipe after, and then drying it with a clean dry cloth. And I'm going to do that between each of these colors to make sure that the color I'm stamping stays true. Now, because this is a pigment ink, you are going to be able to see the ink sitting on top of the stamp. It's going to have a little bit of opacity to it. And they do have a really nice, smooth inking and stamping from the very get-go. I also noticed that they clean really nicely off the stamp, but I'm taking the extra precautions to clean these with the Ultra Clean between each of the colors, just so that I get really true colors here. So I started out with the Hero Arts Hero Hues Reactive Ink in Taffy there. That's that pink color. Then I moved to Fruit Punch, then Creamsicle, Lemon Drop, and now this is Key Lime Fizz, and I absolutely love the vibrancy of this ink. Moving on here to Green Apple. Then we have Pool Party, Blue Raspberry, and you can really see this rainbow building up so nicely. We're going to move on to the True Blues, and that is Splash and Blue Hawaii. Then we're going to move into the purples, and we have here Thistle, and then Grape Slush, which is a nice true kind of real purple color. And finally, we're going to move on to Berry Smoothie, or I shouldn't say finally, but Berry Smoothie is one of my favorites. And then we also have Fog. Now, the cover of this ink pad is a little bit deceiving because it kind of looks green, and there is some green in this gray, but it really is a gray ink. And there is also the salt water available, which I don't have on hand. So the first technique is actually just stamping with these inks. And I know that sometimes we get so caught up in the fancy techniques that we forget that we can create these really beautiful results by stamping solid images with these inks. Now, the second technique we're going to do today is stamping on dark cardstock. Now, I will tell you that other hybrid inks on the market show up better on black cardstock. I am showing you the Distress Oxide because I know some of you are going to ask how they compare. And I think the biggest difference is in their reaction as well as their visibility on the black cardstock. Now, the Hero Hues is on the right-hand side here, and the Distress Oxide is on the left-hand side. And it has more of a white base, so you can see it a little bit better on the black cardstock. However, these still work really great on lighter colored and even craft colored cardstocks. And that pigment property, which lends to the opacity or gives the opacity to these inks, really makes them visible on some of these colored cardstocks. Now, next up in our techniques is ink blending, and these Hero Hues Reactive Inks, because of their pigment properties that stay wet a little bit longer, really are great for ink blending. I'm just using a Ranger ink blending tool. This is actually a brand new sponge, so I'm getting really great results even with this new sponge. The more that you season and use your sponges on your ink blending tools, the better results that you're going to get. And you can see that even with this brand new blending foam, I am getting great results with just some regular Nina Solar White cardstock and the Hero Hues Reactive Ink in Taffy and Lemon Drop here. And I'm just overlapping those colors in the center so that you can get that nice third color blend right there in the middle. But I don't have a whole lot of splotches here. I got a nice, smooth, even blend, and I'm really happy with the results that I got with blending these on just some standard cardstock. Now for the next two techniques, I'm actually taking these inks direct to paper on some watercolor cardstock here. And while direct to paper is a technique, it is not one of the 10 techniques that I'm showing you today. I am just getting a good solid layer of ink onto these watercolor cardstock panels so that I can show you a couple of things that you can do with water reactions and these inks. So I started out with the Hero Hues Reactive Ink in Taffy, and then I'm adding the Lemon Drop. And you can see I'm just allowing these colors to kind of overlap on this watercolor cardstock. I did get a little pink ink onto my yellow ink pad here, but that's okay. I'm just gonna take it to a scrap piece of cardstock and rub off that extra ink, and no harm, no foul. And I'm going to finish off with the Hero Hues Reactive Ink in Pool Party. I did use the Tonic Easy Clean Matte here. This is the one that is the replacement size for the Tim Holtz Media Matte. I actually don't use the Tim Holtz Media Matte. I haven't tried it yet, but I love this size of Easy Clean Matte because it's perfect to just keep in my drawer. It's not too long. It allows me to kind of put a full card front onto this and do the techniques that I want to do. So I use this one the most. So now that I have this ink applied direct to paper, I am going to add water splatters and create some texture with water splatters, and that is my fourth technique today, is that water splatter technique. Now these are going to react differently than other hybrid inks that are on the market, specifically the Distress Oxide inks. You're not going to get the oxidation effect that you get with the Distress Oxide inks. Instead, you're going to get more of a lift effect. So you can create texture on these backgrounds, whether it's ink blended or direct to paper, by adding some water splatters, letting it soak in a little bit, and then just kind of blotting it with a clean, dry cloth. Now the next technique is direct to paper watercolor. This is cheater watercolor. I just smeared that ink on, doused it with some water, and I'm going to set it aside to dry. And this is what it looked like when it dried on its own. So you kind of get a really good feel for how it dries back after you expose it to water by watching that little demonstration there. And that is the quickest and easiest way, I think, that you can do some watercoloring all over a background. Now, the water reactive properties of these inks are what make it great for watercoloring and these watercolor kind of techniques. And the next one on our list is ink smooshing. And so I just have my Hero Hues Reactive Inks, and I'm smashing the ink pad onto a piece of acetate. And then I'm going to spray this acetate until that ink kind of beads up on that acetate. And then I'm going to take this and press this onto some cardstock. Now on this first example, I used some regular Neenah Solar White cardstock. And I will tell you that this ink will absorb really quickly. It will not move a lot on the standard heavyweight Neenah Solar White cardstock. But I'm going to do this technique again. And the next time that I do it, I'm going to do it on some watercolor cardstock. So you can see how that ink just kind of smushed on. It didn't move a lot. This time, I'm going to put it onto some watercolor cardstock. I did exactly the same thing. The only difference here is I'm using watercolor cardstock instead of standard Neenah. And you're going to see that this ink is going to move a whole lot more on this watercolor cardstock than it did on the Neenah Solar White. So when you're playing around with these various techniques, try changing the cardstock if you're not getting the results that you want. It may be the paper that you're using. I know a lot of times we think white paper is white paper, and that's simply not true. They're going to behave differently with different types of inks. So if you're not getting the results that you want, if the ink's not moving like you want it to, then you may consider like a watercolor cardstock or something like that. And I tend to use the Ranger because it is a bright white ink. Now, I didn't water these inks down any more than the previous example, but you're seeing the difference side by side here of the standard cardstock alongside the watercolor cardstock. Now, because these inks have that pigment property, once the inks are dry, you can actually layer other colors on top, and that's what I'm showing here. I've gone back with some taffy and some berry smoothie ink, and I've applied it to my acetate. I've added my water, and then I'm just pouncing this onto my dried background that's on the watercolor cardstock. And you can see I'm layering up those colors. They're not getting muddy because those inks are dry and set. And because of the opacity of these inks, they layer really nicely on top of each other. I'm just going to pounce this onto the standard cardstock as well. And this looks like a hot mess. Probably not something I'm going to use, but maybe I could die cut something out of it. But I just kind of wanted to show you that side-by-side comparison so you get a good feel for how these inks behave, not only with water, but different cardstocks as well. Now, next up, we have standard watercoloring. That's our 7th technique in this video. I've just pressed these onto a tonic easy clean mat. I have a little bit of water on the mat as well. And I'm using a wet paintbrush to pick up these inks and apply them to the smooth side of some Ranger watercolor cardstock. The 3 colors I'm using here are Taffy, Fruit Punch, and Key Lime Fizz. And you can see I'm just creating a really loose watercolor background. The difference that you're going to see in these versus a true watercolor is you're going to get a little bit creamier look out of these inks, and that's because they have the pigment properties in them. Because pigments are more opaque than dyes, then you're going to get that kind of creamy look when you use them to watercolor. So generally speaking, pigment inks look a lot like paint when you press them onto your fingers, and dye inks look a lot like, for lack of a better term, dark colored water. I mean, you can see through dye inks. You generally cannot see through pigment inks the same way you can see through dye inks. So that's what's going to leave you with kind of this creamier look with these Hero Hues Reactive Inks. Now, once I did that, I wanted to add a little bit of blue along the edges, and you're going to see how this mixes together with the previous colors that are still wet to create other colors in my little background here. If I wanted to create a layering effect instead of this blending effect, I would just make sure that these inks were dry before I applied that blue on top of them, and that would give me the layered colors instead of the blended colors. Now, I didn't think I should waste the ink that was on my Easy Clean mat here, so I just grabbed another piece of watercolor cardstock and I am just smooshing this onto the mat. This is not a technique that I'm including in this list of techniques because it's very similar to the acetate smooshing that I did earlier. But you guys can comment below and let me know, do you think this is a different technique, or is it the same technique and I'm just using a mat instead of acetate? I'm not including it. It's not part of the 10, so don't think that I'm cheating here. So next up is ink lifting with stamps. And I'm once again going direct to paper with these ink pads, which, like I said, is technically a technique, but I'm not including it in my list of 10 techniques today. I have the Pool Party and the Blue Raspberry inks. I'm applying them onto watercolor cardstock, and I am going to take a stamp and just spritz it with water and then stamp it onto this ink. Now, the important thing is that you have a lot of ink down on your project and you're going to lift it off with the wet stamp. Now, you can also do this through a stencil or a background stamp, anything like that. You can use various things to create patterns in this ink. But what you want to do is make sure you have a lot of ink, because that's going to give you more intense lifting results. And you're going to let it sit on the ink for, I don't know, maybe 15 to 30 seconds, just to allow that ink to kind of really move with the water. And then you can kind of blot off the water with a dry towel. And you can see now I have those stripes in that inked background. I could have created this inked background with ink blending, some intense ink blending, but I just wanted to get a lot of color down quickly, so I went ahead and went direct to paper today. So that brings us to our 9th technique, and that is simple embossing. Because these inks stay wet for a little bit longer, it gives you enough time to go ahead and stamp the color down, pour some clear embossing powder over, and then heat set that, and you get a really nice, vibrant, glossy raised image with these inks. Now, our final technique, I have to be honest, I didn't really know what to call it, so I'm calling it ink layering. I'm starting out by stamping my stripe stamp in some white pigment ink onto some standard Neenah Solar White cardstock, and then I'm heat setting it with my heat tool. Then I'm going to go over the top with some ink blending, and you're going to see that stamped area kind of grab on to the Hero Hues Reactive Ink, and you're going to see it kind of pop out. Now, I think maybe this might be called ghost stamping, but I cannot be sure. So today I'm just calling it pigment ink layering. And it really is a great way to add some texture into an ink blended background. And I think it's a lot of fun. Now, I am using the Hero Hues Reactive Ink in Taffy, and then I'm going in and adding a little bit of fruit punch to that as well, just to add a little bit of variation in color. I didn't spend a lot of time making this pretty because I just wanted to show you the technique. I'm not planning on using this today, but I really did think it was a fun technique to try out with these inks. Now, this list of 10 techniques is by no means an exhaustive list of techniques that you can do with these inks. Because of their dye and pigment properties, there's lots of things that you can do, but I just wanted to show you 10 techniques that you could try with these Hero Hues Reactive Inks. Now, because I have a lot of cardstock here that had a lot of water applied, I have a lot of warping. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to fix that. I have my mink here, and I have a piece of just regular computer paper that I folded in half. And I'm taking some of these pieces that have been really warped. You can see this one was the cheater watercolor method, or the direct to paper watercolor method. It's really warped because I doused it in water. But I'm going to put this in that paper. I'm going to run it through my mini mink here, and you're going to see, look at that. It flattened it out beautifully. Now, if you don't have a mink machine, you can use a laminator for this, or you can dampen your paper just a slight bit, run it through your die cut machine to add some pressure, and that may help to smooth it out as well. Now, you wouldn't want to do this on anything that has embossing powder because that's going to pull the embossing powder right up. It's going to remelt it, and it's going to stick to your paper, and you're going to have a hot mess. So don't do that with things that have embossing powder on it. But you can do it for things that have not had embossing powder applied to the top. So here's a look at all the things that I did today, the different water reactions, some ink smooshing, some direct to paper or cheater watercolor, some stamping onto some colored cardstock, regular heat embossing. This is all the pieces that I made while playing with these inks today. And now that we have all of these pieces created, it's time to create some cards. So I am using the Hero Arts Stick Together stamp set, and I'm stamping them in some Gina K Amalgam Jet Black ink because I wasn't sure if I'd color them or not. And I'm going to use the coordinating dies and my Platinum 6 die cutting machine from Spellbinders to die cut these images. Now, this is a manual die cut machine, and I will be kind of reviewing this in next month's newsletter. I'm going to be doing a guide to die cutting, so stay tuned for that, and you will learn everything that you need to know about the Platinum 6, the Platinum, and the Gemini Junior, which are my favorite die cut machines. So I'm going to take this watercolor background that I created, and I am stamping this "Thanks for Sticking By Me" sentiment from the Stick Together stamp set. I'm stamping that in some Versamark ink, and then I added some gold embossing powder and heat set that. And then I just took my die cut images, and I didn't even color them because, quite honestly, I thought there was plenty of color on this card. I just adhered those with some foam adhesive, and then took my entire card front and adhered it to a top folding white A2 size card base. And that completes my first card. Now for my second card, I am using the Hero Arts Nesting Hearts Infinity dies, and I am die cutting this direct to paper watercolor background that I created. And I am going to stamp a sentiment from the Crafty Messages stamp set. This is also from Hero Arts. And I am using some VersaFine Clair Onyx Black, or I'm sorry, not Onyx Black, Nocturne Pigment ink, and I'm stamping that onto my heart. And then I'm applying some clear embossing powder over the top, and this is going to give me a shiny raised black embossed sentiment. And then once again, sticking with that black and white image kind of theme that I have going on, I just fussy cut this little paint palette from the Crafty Messages stamp set, and I adhered that on with some foam adhesive and finished that little grouping off with a tiny little pink heart. And now I am stamping the Crafty Tools background onto some white cardstock in some Versamark ink and adding some white embossing powder, and then I'm going to heat set that. And that's just going to create a little bit of texture on my background here. I will adhere my heart using some foam adhesive and then take this entire card front and add it once again to a top folding A2 size card base that's made from some Neenah Solar White heavyweight cardstock. Now my third card, I am using the ink smushed background and I cut it down. I framed it up using the Hero Arts Infinity Wood Frames dies. And then I'm just taking these extra little images that I have from the Stick Together stamp set and adhering those. And then I embossed a sentiment as well onto a piece of vellum in some gold embossing powder and just applied that to a 4-bar size little note card here. And that completes my 3 very simple cards today, featuring all of these pieces that I made when I was exploring the Hero Hues Reactive Inks from Hero Arts. I really did enjoy this exploration of these inks and kind of just getting a little bit inky and doing something that I kind of don't always do. But it was fun exploring these 10 different techniques featuring these really fun and beautiful new inks from Hero Arts. As always, I will have links to the featured products used in these projects in the description at YouTube, but head on over to the ellenhutson.com blog. Over there, you'll find more still shots, more information, and a complete list of supplies. As always, thanks for stopping by and joining me today. I'm so glad you're here. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the ellenhutson.com YouTube channel so you don't miss any of our paper crafting and card making video tutorials. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the very end. You know, if you've made it this far, you are one of my favorites. If you want to subscribe to our channel, go ahead and click the button on the left side of the screen. And here's a couple more video tutorials I thought you might enjoy.